911. What's your emergency? A pause. Then a breathless voice, trembling. It's my cousin's baby. She's not breathing. She's cold. There's blood. Please, please hurry. The line goes quiet. In a sleepy corner of Indiana, a call like this should have led to swift justice. But what followed shook the nation. A 16-month-old toddler, covered in bruises and wounds, was found unresponsive in her car seat. Her hair ripped out. Her lip split open. Her tiny body bore the signs of relentless torment. Her name was Alissa Guernsey. She had no voice left to cry out with. But her body spoke volumes. Doctors tried, paramedics fought, but it was too late. Alissa was pronounced dead that evening in March 2009, and while her short life ended in that hospital, her story, her truth, was only just beginning to surface. Because what killed her wasn't just the woman meant to protect her. It was a system that saw the signs and still looked away. This isn't just the story of a child's murder. It's the story of a community that stayed silent. A judge who closed the book before the last chapter. A doctor who missed what was right in front of him, and a legal system that sentenced her killer to just 77 days in jail. Alissa Guernsey's death wasn't a mystery. It was a warning, one no one listened to. Alissa Guernsey was born on November 2, 2007. A sweet, smiling baby girl with wide brown eyes and soft blonde curls. She was her father's light, her mother's joy, and the youngest of 3 siblings. Her family called her Little Beauty. And in every photo from those early months, she's either giggling or nestled into someone's arms. She was healthy, happy, whole. But fate doesn't always play fair. In November 2008, just after Alissa turned 1, her father, Mike Guernsey, died suddenly in a car crash. The loss shattered her mother, Kelly Sprunger, who was already struggling with depression and past addiction. Alone with 3 children, Kelly tried to hold herself together, but the burden became too heavy. That's when Christy Schaffer stepped in, Kelly's cousin, a woman with her own children, her own home, and supposedly her own heart. In December 2008, with the court's approval, Alissa and her siblings were placed in Christy's care, temporarily, until Kelly could rebuild her life. It seemed like a solution grounded in family, in trust. But within days of arriving at the Schaffer home, Alissa's world began to change. First, there were missed court dates, then injuries with odd explanations, hair falling out, bruises in strange places. And each time Alissa was taken to the doctor, Christy had a new story. A fall, a rash, a fever. Excuses stacked on top of silence. Over 15 documented medical visits followed, each one an opportunity to notice what was happening. But no one stepped in, not the doctors, not the courts, not even the Department of Child Services. Alissa's smile began to fade, her playful spirit dulled. And by the end of March 2009, the healthy child who had once lit up every room had become unrecognizable. And just days later, she was dead. Between December 2008 and March 2009, Alissa was taken to the doctor more than 15 times. Each visit told part of a story no one bothered to piece together. At first, it was a small cut, a bump, some hair loss. Then came bruises, a fractured elbow, scabs on her face, a black eye. Over and over, Christy Schaffer showed up with the baby in her arms and an excuse on her lips. She fell. She's sick. She's clumsy. Every week, a new injury. Every week, the same indifference. Dr. John Egley became her regular physician, the man who saw her most, the one who could have connected the dots. But he never did. Not once did he report suspected abuse. Not even when Alissa showed up with a deep forehead wound. Not when her hair was falling out in patches. Not when Christy began claiming the child had leukemia, despite every test coming back clean. Christy lied with confidence. She blamed genetics, prenatal exposure, even fetal alcohol syndrome, though toxicology at birth proved otherwise. And somehow her words held more weight than the bruises covering Alissa's tiny body. At home, the abuse worsened. Christy pulled out her hair, screamed at her, beat her. But in the sterile calm of a doctor's office, she smiled and reassured everyone that everything was fine, and they believed her. DCS visited too. Social workers came, and each time Christy said the children were adjusting well. If someone was sick, she'd cancel the visits. If their mother asked to see them, she had a reason why they couldn't. Slowly, she cut off contact, until Alissa was no longer just isolated. She was hidden. Each missed appointment, each misdiagnosis, each unchecked bruise was another step closer to the inevitable. Alissa wasn't just being failed by her caregiver. She was being failed by every adult who looked at her pain and called it something else. March the 28th, 2009 started like any other Saturday in the Schaffer home. The children woke up early. They played. They ate. No one outside the house had any idea that by sundown, one of them would be gone forever. That evening, around 6:45 p.m., Christy Schaffer loaded the kids into her car. She said they were going to rent a movie and grab Happy Meals from McDonald's. Alissa, just 16 months old, sat in her car seat. Her older cousin Lily sat beside her. The ride should have been uneventful, but something snapped. What triggered Christy's rage that night remains unclear. Maybe Alissa cried. Maybe she didn't eat fast enough. Maybe she simply existed in a way that annoyed Christy. But what's known is that during that car ride, Christy lashed out violently. She struck Alissa in the head again and again. Her body went limp. Her head fell forward. Lily, just a child herself, watched it all happen. And when she asked, "What's wrong with Alissa?" Christy snapped, "Stop asking." Alissa began making strange gurgling sounds, signs of neurological trauma. Her brain was swelling. She needed help immediately. But instead of rushing her to a hospital, Christy drove home. They arrived around 8:20 p.m. Alissa had now been unconscious for nearly 2 hours. Christy carried the other children inside first, leaving the dying toddler alone in the car. Only later did she return and pretend to be surprised by how unwell Alissa looked. She didn't call 911. She called her brother Nate, a paramedic. By the time Nate arrived, Alissa's body was cold. She wasn't breathing. There was no pulse. Finally, at 8:25 p.m., Christy called for help. CPR was performed until 8:52. She was rushed to Parkview LaGrange Hospital. Doctors did everything they could. They administered Narcan in case of narcotic exposure. They worked for 47 minutes, but at 9:54 p.m., Alissa Guernsey was pronounced dead. She never had a chance. Alissa's tiny body was transferred that night to the St. Joseph Forensic Center in Fort Wayne. The job of uncovering the truth fell to Dr. Scott Wagner, a forensic pathologist with years of experience. But even he wasn't prepared for what he was about to find. The autopsy was harrowing. Alissa's face and body were covered in bruises, fresh and old. The top of her head bore clusters of purple-black trauma marks. Her lip was torn from the inside. Her left elbow was broken with growth plate displacement, a painful injury rarely seen in children so young. Her gums were lacerated. Bald spots on her head revealed where hair had been forcefully ripped out, not shed naturally, but yanked with intention. Internally, the damage was worse. A bilateral subdural hematoma, bleeding on both sides of her brain, revealed repeated blunt force trauma. This wasn't a single accident. It was the result of days, maybe weeks, of abuse. Dr. Wagner also discovered that Alissa hadn't been given any of the medications Christy claimed she was on. No signs of Vicodin or any prescribed pain relief were found in her system. Only the Narcan administered in the ER was present, proof that Christy had lied about treating her. The findings were clear. The injuries weren't random, they weren't medical. They weren't misunderstood. They were inflicted, they were brutal, and they were fatal. Dr. Wagner classified Alissa's death as a homicide due to blunt force head trauma. Not an accident, not sudden illness, a murder. The autopsy didn't just reveal how Alissa died, it told the story of how she lived her final days, in pain, in fear, with no protection, no comfort, no escape. This wasn't just a child who died, this was a child who was tortured. And now, the question was, would anyone be held accountable? From the outside, it seemed like an open and shut case. A baby murdered under suspicious circumstances. A caregiver with a history of deceptive behavior. A medical examiner's report clearly stating homicide. But in LaGrange County, Indiana, things weren't that simple. The woman who had been caring for Alissa, Christy Schaffer, wasn't a stranger to the legal system. Her father, Cary Sprunger, was a prominent banker in the area, a man with deep roots in the community. He sat on local boards, volunteered in civic projects, and had long-standing friendships with some of the most powerful figures in town. One of those friends, Judge J. Scott Vanderbeck. Another, County Prosecutor Jeff Weibel. And the third, Dr. John Egley, Alissa's pediatrician, the same doctor who saw her over a dozen times and never once flagged a concern. When Alissa died, all three men played critical roles in the outcome of the case. And what followed was not justice. It was protection. Instead of charging Christy Schaffer with murder, Weibel presented the case to a grand jury behind closed doors. No public trial, no media scrutiny. And when charges came, they weren't for homicide. They were for a lesser crime, neglect of a dependent. Even then, Judge Vanderbeck handed down a sentence so lenient it sent shockwaves through the nation. 10 years in prison, on paper. 6 years suspended, immediately. And just 77 days behind bars before Christy Schaffer walked free. No trial, no apology, no explanation. This wasn't just about a mother failing her child. This was about a court failing its people. Because when friends sit on benches, when prosecutors hesitate, and when doctors stay silent, truth becomes optional. Alissa didn't just die from her injuries. She died in a system where power protected the wrong person, and where a baby's life was worth less than the reputation of the people who failed her. The news of Christy Schaffer walking free after just 77 days didn't just break hearts, it ignited a fire. Across Indiana, and then across the country, people were furious. The story of Alissa Guernsey, a 16-month-old baby tortured and killed, reached headlines. Not because the system delivered justice, but because it failed so spectacularly. In small towns and big cities, people began asking the same question. How can someone murder a child and serve less time than most do for stealing a car? It didn't take long for that outrage to organize. A group of grieving, angry, determined women banded together. They called themselves Alissa's Army. Most of them had never met Alissa, but her story haunted them, her eyes, her pain, her silence. They made signs, printed T-shirts, held rallies outside the courthouse where Christy had once stood, and they refused to let the world forget her name. One group, Baby Alissa Cries for Justice, gained over 100,000 followers online. They pushed for new investigations. They demanded answers. They wrote letters, signed petitions, and showed up again and again. Their message was clear. This is not okay. A child was killed and her killer walked free. This isn't justice, this is corruption. As media outlets picked up the story, Inside Edition, local news, and advocacy podcasts, Alissa's face was everywhere. The chubby cheeks, the soft smile, and the horror of what was done to her. Even with the case closed, her army never stopped marching. Because what they were fighting for wasn't just justice for Alissa. It was a promise to every other child being silenced behind closed doors. You are not invisible. We see you, and we will not stay silent. Even after Alissa's death was ruled a homicide, even after the bruises, the fractures, the torn lip, and the ripped-out hair, no murder charge ever came. Christy Schaffer was allowed to disappear into a quiet life. Her sentence suspended, her story almost buried. But the damage wasn't just what she did, it was what others didn't do. Dr. John Egley, who saw Alissa over a dozen times and failed to report the abuse, kept his medical license. When questioned later, he said he had no reason to suspect anything sinister. But to this day, people ask, how do you miss black eyes, bald patches, bruises, broken bones, unless you don't want to see them? Prosecutor Jeff Weibel, who chose not to charge Christy with murder, never gave a full explanation. His connection to the Schaffer family was questioned, but never investigated. He moved on, quietly, successfully. And Judge Scott Vanderbeck, the man who reduced Christie's sentence to 77 days despite public outrage, retired without ever facing accountability. In one court hearing, he openly admitted knowing Christie's father, even complimented him on his good heart. That same father had been a banker, a community figure, someone the judge had sat with on local boards for years. Christy Schaffer was protected by the people who should have been protecting Alissa. And while the world outside was screaming for justice, the courtroom stayed silent. The Department of Child Services? They, too, slipped through the cracks. Despite multiple missed visits, complaints from Alissa's mother, obvious red flags, and a dozen doctor appointments, nothing was done. No one was fired, no policy was changed. It was as if Alissa's death didn't matter, as if her life never did. But the truth is, what happened in LaGrange County wasn't a failure, it was a choice. One made over and over again by people who were supposed to care. For a while, it looked like Christy Schaffer had gotten away with everything. She had served only 77 days for the death of a child. Her own children were never removed. She went back to her life, while Alissa's was reduced to a grave and a name on a protest sign. But karma has a way of circling back. In 2013, just 4 years after Alissa's death, Christy was arrested again. This time for something else entirely, methamphetamine. Police found evidence that meth was being produced in her garage. She was involved. Her urine tested positive. She tried to flush the drugs and paraphernalia down the toilet, but it was too late. This time, the law had proof they couldn't ignore. Her probation was revoked, and finally, she was sentenced, this time to 6 years in prison. Not for killing a child, but for drugs. The irony was painful. The woman who broke a baby's body got more prison time for breaking drug laws. And yet, for many who had fought for justice, it felt like a small sliver of accountability. Too little, too late. By then, Alissa's memory had become a movement. Her story was taught in forums on child abuse prevention. Advocates used her name when pushing for stronger CPS reform, and across the country people whispered the same bitter truth. Sometimes, justice only arrives when the headlines are gone. Christy Schaffer eventually walked out of prison again, but this time not unnoticed. The world knew her name, her face, what she had done, and what she had been allowed to walk away from. Even if the system never gave Alissa the justice she deserved, Christy would never again hide behind silence, because too many people were now watching. Alissa Guernsey lived for just 16 months. She never learned to speak in full sentences. She never got to run through a backyard without fear. She never had a first day of preschool, but somehow, even in death, her voice became louder than ever. Her story didn't just move people, it changed them. Parents who once ignored bruises now ask questions. Doctors who once hesitated now report. Teachers who used to look the other way now look twice. Because one baby girl suffered in silence, thousands have promised to never let another child go unseen again. Across the country, people still wear shirts that read, "Justice for Alissa." Online groups continue to grow. Balloons are released on the anniversary of her death. Candles are lit in her memory. A grave in Bronson, Michigan, is never without flowers. Many left by strangers who never met her, but refused to forget her. Her mother, Kelly Sprunger, still fights. She carries the weight of a system that failed both her and her child. She filed lawsuits. She spoke out. She faced the kind of pain no parent should, and still found the strength to keep Alissa's memory alive. Alissa's army continues their mission. They remind the world that a child's bruises should never be brushed off, that silence can kill, that justice must be louder than politics, friendship, and reputation. Some call Alissa the little dragonfly, a symbol of transformation, a tiny creature whose wings stir storms. And maybe she was. Because even in her absence, Alissa created change. She exposed a broken system. She united strangers into a force of voices, and she reminded us all of a truth too often forgotten. The children are not invisible. They deserve love, protection, a chance. Alissa never got hers. But because of her, maybe others will.